Under the scorching Texas sun of 1983, 17-year-old Emily Carter vanished on a few minutes from home on a back road, leaving her family and the entire town of Killeen plunged into panic. All police found was a bicycle placed far too neatly and a handful of scattered witness statements, causing the investigation to stall for decades. Yet through all those years, one officer never gave up, clinging to the gut feeling that a crucial detail had been deliberately hidden from day one. Then one day, when an old case file was unexpectedly handed over, a witness statement that had vanished for 36 years suddenly resurfaced, a tiny detail powerful enough to flip the entire direction of the investigation. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you love this kind of content, don't forget to hit subscribe. Killeen, Texas, late summer afternoon 1983, the reddish sunlight draped over dusty roads that ran along the edge of Fort Hood, where the steady rumble of military vehicles echoed like the town's heartbeat. School let out, students scattered in every direction, and among them, 17-year-old Emily Carter quietly walked out the gate with her faded canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. Instead of taking her usual route straight home, Emily turned onto the rarely used back road, a narrow path that hugged a row of bone-dry eucalyptus trees, where hot wind blowing from the base carried the smell of engine oil and red dust clinging to the air. A few neighbors saw her figure gradually disappear down that path, small frame, hair whipped to one side by the wind, until the road curved toward an open field. No one paid much attention at the time. In this town, kids sometimes took shortcuts to avoid the heat. But as the sun dropped fast behind the low rooftops and the orange glow faded from the sidewalks, an unnamed dread began spreading through the Carter house. Emily was always home on time. She never wandered after school, never went to a friend's house without telling someone. Her mother Denise opened windows, looking onto the darkening street, checked the clock, checked the phone, paced from room to room as if opening one more door might make her daughter appear. Neighbors hadn't seen her stop by that afternoon. Her best friend called and said she hadn't seen Emily since they left school. When night fully fell and the weak streetlights flickered on, Denise and relatives walked the neighborhood, following every familiar path, checking the empty lot behind the ball field, peering onto every porch, calling Emily's name into the silence. No trace, no dropped belongings, nothing, just the eerie quiet of a town used to military noise, suddenly gone still. Finally, after every place Emily might have gone had been searched in growing panic, Denise returned home, picked up the rotary phone, and called the police to report her daughter missing, the moment that marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Killeen for decades. That first night, after receiving the call, Killeen PD officers arrived quickly at the Carters' small house, where the living room fluorescent light fell across Denise's pale, worried face. The two night shift officers started gathering basic information. Emily left school at dismissal, normally took a set route home, no history of running away or recent serious arguments. Every family answer carried the same tone. Emily wasn't the type to disappear without a word. From the Carter house they went door to door with neighbors. The man across the street said he saw Emily from a distance, but didn't remember which way she went. The person at the end of the alley saw nothing unusual. An elderly woman said uneasily, that night fell faster than usual, like something heavy was pressing down on the town. Police wrote everything down, though most accounts were vague and lacking detail. With Emily's friends, they confirmed she had no plans after school. One girl added a detail that made the officers pause their pens. Today she turned onto the back road behind the trees. Emily never takes that way. For the first time that evening, a real anomaly appeared, because if Emily changed routes there had to be a reason, someone she was meeting, someone calling her from afar, or did she see something on the main road that made her turn? Leaving the friend's house, the two officers sketched a rough movement model in their notebooks. Initial route model. From the school gate home, there were three possibilities. Two familiar routes led into busy residential areas. The third, the back road where Emily was last seen, headed west toward empty land, bordering low hills and Fort Hood training corridors. Not a place students normally walked. The officers exchanged a look that needed no words. That direction had to be checked first. Just as they headed back to the patrol car, a middle-aged man walking his dog stopped and asked what was going on. When he heard a girl was missing, he paused, then said he'd seen a brown pickup driving very slowly near the vacant land around dusk. He didn't see anyone inside, and didn't know if it was connected, but it didn't feel like any vehicle from around here. The detail was immediately noted as a point of interest. In missing person cases, a slow-moving vehicle in a low-traffic area is always a red flag. The officers marked the area around the back road as the priority sector for the search. It was late, but the urgency pushed everyone to move faster than usual. One officer said quietly, voicing what both were thinking but didn't want to say yet, "This girl didn't just walk off." Heavy silence filled the patrol car, broken only by the soft crackle of the radio as they started the engine and headed into the dark western edge of town. What they found there, or failed to find, would shape the entire investigation for the next 42 years. The first impromptu search party, made up of a few Killeen PD officers, neighborhood volunteers from the Carter area, and 2 Fort Hood soldiers on night duty, converged at the junction where the back road Emily was last seen, met the path into the western scrubland. Flashlight beams cut thin columns of light across red dirt, jagged rocks, and knee-high weeds. The night air felt thick, still holding the day's stifling heat. Many in the group had never set foot in this scrubland, but everyone knew a child or teenager would never choose to walk there alone after dark. "Keep a fan pattern 10 paces apart," the lead officer said softly over the radio. In fresh missing person cases, the goal isn't finding a perpetrator, it's finding any sign the victim is still in the area. A dropped paper, footprint, scrap of fabric, even faint tire tracks can open an entire line of inquiry. The scrubland terrain made searching brutal. Low mesquite crowded together, yucca plants sprouted in sharp clumps like knives, and the ground cracked into irregular plates that could send searchers stumbling. The constant drone of insects, mixed with distant training artillery echoing from Fort Hood, created a tense soundtrack for the night. Flashlights moved like lost fireflies across the ground as people bent low, touching dry leaves, trampled grass, soft patches that might hold prints. For nearly an hour, they found nothing connected to Emily. No backpack, no jacket, no books, no matching footprints. That confused the officers. Usually a teen who vanishes suddenly leaves at least some small sign. But here everything was unnaturally still. The search commander whispered into the radio, "Nothing, it's like she vanished into thin air." But scrubland is never completely silent. A Fort Hood soldier walking the northern edge of the line stopped abruptly. He aimed his light at a flatter patch of ground. On the thin cracked red surface was a faint drag mark. Not a tire track, not a clear shoe print, just a shallow groove about 2 steps long. The mark was odd because it didn't follow the wind direction, and didn't match the search team's footprints. It looked like something had been dragged then disappeared into the tall grass ahead. The commander immediately ordered everyone to freeze, so as not to disturb the scene. They circled their lights and examined closer. It wasn't an adult running, wasn't a small animal. If it was Emily's shoe, it was too distorted to tell. But if it was someone dragging an object, or a person who lost balance being pulled, then it was a major lid. "This heads west 30 meters, then turns right," an officer said, sweeping his light along the groove toward a darker, thicker clump of trees. That spot hadn't been in the original priority zone. The drag mark changed everything. The commander radioed, "Expand the search. Mark Sector B14 urgent." Volunteers split. One group circled east to block escape routes, the other followed the faint groove. No clear sign of Emily appeared in the next 100 meters, but the very existence of that faint drag mark forced the officers to one critical conclusion: Emily could not have turned into this area and vanished without a trace on her own. An external actor had been here, right where night falls fast and locals avoid. The moment they studied that drag mark, the entire team understood they had shifted from searching for a lost teen to tracking criminal behavior. One officer said softly, reminding himself and everyone nearby, "This isn't right. She probably didn't walk in here willingly." And from that moment, the Emily Carter disappearance officially entered a darker phase, one where every patch of dirt, every bush, every tiny mark, could become the first real evidence in a mystery that would last decades. The search team pushed deeper into newly marked Sector B14, following the faint drag mark. Flashlights carved cold streaks through thick brush, and in the heavy air thick with earth and resin smell, everyone stayed quiet, listening for the slightest sound, afraid to miss the fragile trail guiding them. When the group reached a slight depression, where weeds grew tall enough to block sightlines, a volunteer crouched low, aimed his light, and called softly, "Wait, something's here." Everyone stopped and turned their beams to the same spot. Among the weeds, a piece of metal glinted, revealing itself bit by bit like something deliberately hidden. When they parted the grass, the familiar shape of a bicycle appeared, green frame, slightly faded plastic basket in front. No one needed to check serial numbers or ask the family, they all knew this was Emily's bike. The bicycle lay on its side, not thrown hard, not dragged, a thin even layer of dust covered it, as if it had been placed rather than dropped in panic or struggle. Most telling, the rear tire was completely flat, pressed so flat against the ground, that the rim sank halfway into the grass. An officer ran his hand along the rubber, feeling the edge, then said quietly, "No tear, no puncture." The man beside him gently twisted the valve, and found it unusually loose. This wasn't a slow leak from terrain or a sharp object. Someone had very likely loosened the valve on purpose, so the tire would deflate gradually enough to unbalance the bike without making loud noise when it stopped. No one spoke for several seconds. In teen disappearances, finding the bicycle is usually the first sign the victim ran into trouble and had to abandon it. But here, everything was too quiet, too clean, too intentional. No scratches on the handlebars, no long skid marks in the dirt, no cluster of footprints around it, no signs of impact. If Emily had crashed, the soft ground would show it. If someone dragged her away, the grass would be broken in that direction. But at this scene, there was none of that. One officer whispered, "It's like someone put it back after they were done." Another group swept lights around, looking for dropped belongings, backpack, notebooks, keychain, anything. But the area around the bike remained inexplicably clean. That gave rise to the biggest suspicion: this could be a staged scene, a location arranged to mislead. In investigations, staged scenes usually mean intervention by someone deliberate, knowledgeable, or at least someone who didn't want the real starting point discovered. A younger officer, after circling the area 3 times, said low enough only his team could hear, "If Emily ran away, or got lost, there'd be chaotic footprints, there'd be handlebar or front tire impact. This has none." The commander nodded slowly. All surrounding grass stood upright, the dirt under the wheels showed no gouges, and the entire roughly 30-foot area had no additional disturbance beyond the faint drag mark found earlier. The bicycle, the first physical evidence, didn't answer questions, it only raised more. Police immediately marked the site critical, and photographed everything before transporting the bike to the lab for fingerprints, soil samples, or fibers on the seat. They began reconstructing possible scenarios. Emily riding the back road, tire deliberately deflated, she has to stop, and someone approaches, or worse, the bike was placed here to create an entirely false story about where she actually disappeared. As the search pushed beyond the patch of weeds, still no new traces appeared, no answering calls, no dropped items, no disturbed strips, just the thick darkness of the scrubland, and the unnatural silence of a scene someone had tampered with. Finally, the search commander concluded over the radio, voice tight, "This doesn't fit a lost person. Someone did this." And with the discovery of the bicycle, the Emily Carter case officially shifted from a possible runaway to a case bearing clear signs of outside orchestration, the first clue that the mystery was far deeper than anyone imagined. As the bicycle was moved out for forensic photos, investigators kept combing the ground around that small contradictory patch, an area only a few meters wide, yet so full of inconsistencies, everyone felt something was off. The forensics officer used his flashlight at a low angle to highlight any depressions or grooves the naked eye might miss, and right then the first key detail emerged clearly. There were at least 2 distinct types of tire tracks in the dry dirt. The first type was fairly clear, narrow, small-tread bicycle tire marks that matched Emily's bike. Those tracks came from the direction the search team had just entered, ran a short distance, then stopped right where the bicycle was found. That made sense. But the second type was completely different. Wider treads with a sawtooth pattern that didn't match any bicycle tire. They weren't quite pickup truck size either, too small for that, yet larger than a motorcycle. Most likely they belonged to an older personal vehicle, or some uncommon type not widely seen in Killeen in 1983. Even more telling, the second set of tire marks didn't run parallel or cross the bicycle path. They appeared for a short stretch, then abruptly vanished, as if the vehicle had only paused for a moment before turning around or backing out a different way. No broken grass, no deep skid from hard braking, no long emergency stop slide, just short, interrupted sections that didn't follow any natural movement pattern. This was the first anomaly that made investigators suspect the second vehicle hadn't just passed through. It had stopped deliberately, carried out some action, then left the scene in a calculated manner. About 2 steps from the bicycle, an officer spotted a single shoe print. The print was pressed into soft soil near the root of a yucca plant, faint, but clear enough to show it was significantly larger than Emily's foot size. Based on length and depth, it could belong to an adult male, size 9 to 11, US. But the striking thing was this print stood alone. No approach prints, no departure prints. On such soft ground, anyone standing long enough to leave a clear impression would normally leave additional footprints, unless they stepped down from a hard surface or deliberately erased the rest. Neither scenario fit a lone teenager. Not natural at all, one officer muttered, while crouching to re-examine the print. The shoe mark was too isolated, too clean, too perfectly placed, to draw attention yet missing every piece of useful information. That raised the likelihood that it was the only mark left after someone had tampered with the scene, an attempt to mislead police about location, direction of movement, or what actually happened before Emily disappeared. The surrounding ground showed no blood, not even a drop. No scraps of fabric, hair ties, dropped papers, or personal items, the kinds of things usually present in an attack or struggle between victim and assailant. The total absence of such signs made it almost impossible that Emily had fallen, then struck or fled the scene in panic. Everything was too clean, as if no fight had ever taken place. One of the more experienced officers, who had worked a few scattered missing person cases around that time, surveyed the entire scene and summed it up simply: somebody here knew exactly what they were doing. From the neatly repositioned bicycle, to the interrupted tire tracks, to the lone shoe print, everything carried the same feeling: someone had intervened after the fact. A rational person who knew what police look for first, had adjusted the scene just enough to mislead, without overdoing it, and drawing extra suspicion. That very night, the investigative team wrote a line in the preliminary scene report that changed the entire direction of the case. Possibility of post-event scene manipulation, the possibility the scene had been staged after the fact. This was a critical turning point, because it marked the first time Killeen PD seriously considered that Emily's disappearance was neither random, nor an accident, nor an impulsive teenage runaway. With that conclusion, the search was no longer simply looking for a lost teenager, it became an investigation into deliberate criminal behavior. Someone had altered the evidence, and might be hiding something far bigger in the Texas scrubland darkness. The strange marks around the bicycle prompted police to expand interviews with everyone living near where Emily was last seen. In cases without direct witnesses, scattered memories from locals can sometimes piece together a picture the scene itself can't fully tell. But that night in Killeen, what people said didn't line up neatly. Each account felt like a warped puzzle piece, making the overall story more tangled instead of clearer. The first witness was Harold Briggs, the middle-aged man walking his dog the police had briefly spoken to during the initial search. This time questioned formally, he described with confidence he saw a brown pickup moving slowly along the back road late in the afternoon. According to him, the truck didn't belong to anyone nearby. In a small town, people knew each other's vehicles well enough to spot a stranger. The truck never sped up or braked hard. It crawled along the dusty red road, as if the driver was looking for something or watching someone walking ahead. Briggs couldn't read the plate, but he remembered the late sun glinting off the faded brown paint, giving the impression the truck was old. In a town where lighter-colored pickups were more common in 1983, this one immediately stood out as suspicious. The second witness, Ruth McKinley, lived in a wooden house about 250 meters from where Emily's bicycle was found. She was the only one who provided an auditory detail. She said that toward the end of the afternoon, while watering plants in her backyard, she heard a distant scream or shout. She couldn't tell whose voice or whether it was male or female. She also wasn't sure of the exact direction, because wind from the base often mixed with every sound. But she insisted she had never heard anything like that out on the empty land, an area where the only usual noises were insects and distant military vehicles. Though not precise enough to serve as hard evidence, Ruth's statement made investigators consider the possibility Emily had encountered someone in that area before vanishing. The third witness told a completely opposite story. 15-year-old Donnie Phillips, a student who lived nearby, said he was standing at the ball field behind the school when he saw Emily walking alone, no one following her, no vehicle anywhere in the area. Donnie claimed he had a clear view of the back road from where he stood, and if there had been a brown pickup or any kind of altercation, he definitely would have seen or heard something. When pressed, he repeated emphatically, there was nobody else, just her. The absolute certainty made investigators wonder whether he had actually seen her entire route, or only a brief segment, or whether his teenage memory had blended different moments together. The contradictions among the three statements forced the team to handle the problem more technically. In a temporary meeting room set up in the Carter's garage, police spread out a map of the area and marked the exact spot where each witness claimed to have been standing at the time of observation. Briggs's position, at the curve leading to the open land, was marked in red. His line of sight, based on his description, easily allowed him to see a slow-moving pickup on the dirt road. The setting sun hit at the exact angle he described, explaining why he saw only the color and not the driver's face. Ruth's position was marked in blue. She was far enough away not to see anything visually, but close enough that a strange sound carried by the wind across the scrubland could reach her, consistent with the acoustics of the area. Donnie's position, marked in yellow, was offset from the others. The ball field only gave a clear view of a short section of the back road. Bushes and the curve blocked the rest. Therefore, his claim of seeing no one but Emily was only accurate for the portion he could see, not the entire route. Not to mention he was a teenager whose memory could be affected by emotion. Once the map was complete, the investigators realized the three statements did not actually contradict each other. Each person had simply seen a different part of the same sequence of events. Emily could have been walking alone in the segment Donnie saw, then, in the segment Briggs saw the brown pickup, the truck could have been creeping behind her, or stopped, and the scream Ruth heard could have come from the part Donnie couldn't observe. A quiet suspicion crept into the analysis. What the three witnesses described might not conflict at all, it might fit together into one larger truth. When the lead investigator looked at the map and underlined the three observation points in red, he concluded with a short sentence that dropped the temperature in the room. If everything each of them saw is correct, then Emily was never alone. For the first time in internal reports, Killeen PD recorded the possibility that Emily's disappearance involved a vehicle, a second person, and some tense moment that occurred before she vanished, even if they didn't yet know exactly how. From that point, the case began moving away from natural disappearance categories and closer to signs of deliberate criminal action, a line of inquiry that would pull the entire town deeper into the Texas scrubland mystery. The conflicting statements helped police establish one crucial point: Emily could not have simply vanished in the scrubland without leaving any trace. But the even more important point, and the direction the lead investigator stressed from the start of the next meeting, came down to the simplest question: why did Emily take that road? Family, friends, and teachers all said the same thing. Emily was a creature of habit, rarely changed her route, especially on sweltering afternoons, like the day she disappeared. The back road where she was last seen didn't lead home, didn't lead to any familiar store, and had no destination she would normally visit. Lead investigator Lieutenant Warren Hale stood before the large map spread across the table, circling Emily's usual route with his pen. From the school gate to home, it was a straight, busy, safe road. Yet that day she turned onto the side branch that curved toward open land. Not random, Hale said. A 17-year-old doesn't suddenly choose a dark, empty route unless something made her change her mind. Everyone understood what he meant. No one could prove Emily was forced to turn, but neither could they rule out that she received a signal, a call, a familiar sign, or someone she trusted appearing at just the right spot. The team began analyzing the behavioral angle, pre-disappearance behavior pattern. Cases like this usually fall into three categories. 1. The victim voluntarily goes to meet someone they know. The victim responds to an unexpected signal, for example someone calling their name from a distance. 3. The victim is forced to change direction by a threatening or unusual situation on the main route. All three possibilities pointed to the same thing. A second actor had to be involved. Emily showed no signs of struggle, impact or chaotic flight. Everything suggested she left her usual route while still calm. The investigators treated this as a key indicator. Emily may have followed someone she felt safe with, or at the very least someone she did not perceive as a threat. Hale pointed to the boundary area where the bicycle was found, and told the team, "Assume she turned in here because someone called to her, or was waiting. We need to find out who in the last 3 years ever approached Emily, hung around the school, or lived or worked near this area." The room went quiet for a few seconds. This was the first step toward building the primary person of interest list. First to be circled were people Emily knew, male classmates, neighbors, anyone she had spoken to. Using school records and family notes, they compiled a list of roughly a dozen people who interacted with her regularly. Most were harmless classmates, but among them was one boy who had shown interest in Emily and been gently turned down. No serious red flags, but still worth checking. Second group, residents along the back road. That area had 6 homes, 1 old warehouse, and 3 people who regularly used the rear access to Fort Hood. 2 of them were added to the list because they were known to come and go across the open land around dismissal time. One was an underground utility repairman, the other, a veterinarian who liked jogging the trails. No evidence against either, but their schedules matched the time Emily turned. Third, and most suspicious group, people Emily didn't know, but who were in the vicinity that afternoon. 3 stood out: a man driving a brown pickup as Briggs described, a middle-aged man previously reported for minor disturbance near the vacant land a few months earlier, and a seasonal worker who had been employed at the old warehouse where a jacket would later be found. Police started cross-referencing brown pickup registrations in Bell County records, but the problem was immediate. There were a large number of brown trucks in the 1980s, and many were similar shades, but not exact matches to the witness description. No traffic cameras, no tracking systems, just human memory. This forced investigators to keep relying on behavioral patterns and logic. Hale ended the session with a sentence that noticeably lowered optimism in the room. If Emily turned in there, the person who made her turn is definitely on this list. And if we don't find a match, that means someone exists who isn't on the list yet. Someone we don't even know is hiding in the shadows of this case. For the first time, Killeen PD openly acknowledged in internal minutes that Emily Carter's disappearance showed signs of active targeting rather than a random event. And with the primary person of interest list taking shape, the investigation officially moved into the phase of hunting the individual behind Emily's fateful unexplained turn, a small clue powerful enough to open a mystery that would stretch more than 4 decades. About 3 days after the primary POI list was created, the expanded search spread beyond the original scrubland and moved toward the areas bordering the back of Rancier Road, particularly a row of old warehouses roughly half a mile from where the bicycle was found. Those warehouses, long abandoned, were nothing more than cold concrete shells eaten away by time, rusted metal doors, and walls streaked with peeling paint. Not a place children played, nor anywhere locals had reason to visit. But for exactly that reason, it became a priority. Remote, rarely visited sites always carry a higher chance of discarded evidence. The search team split into two groups, each walking one row of warehouses, pushing aside vines growing around the doors and shining lights into every crack. By then the afternoon was fading, sunlight slanted down, stretching long shadows that made the place feel larger and more desolate than it actually was. A young officer walking behind one warehouse that still had most of its roof suddenly stopped. His flashlight beam caught something pale blue lying at the base of the back wall. He crouched, reached down, and pulled the object out from the layer of dust beneath his feet. When he brushed off the dirt, the familiar shape became clear: a denim jacket. No one on the team had to ask what it was. Family photos showed Emily often wore a light blue denim jacket on hot but windy days, and that very afternoon, classmates had confirmed she was wearing it. The jacket lay loosely rolled, as if gently placed, not thrown, not torn in a struggle. But what sent a slight chill through the investigators wasn't the jacket itself, it was its condition. The jacket was unnaturally clean, not freshly laundered clean, but clean in a way that felt wrong. Dust clung only to the outer fabric where it had touched the ground. The inside, the part that should have carried sweat, skin cells, even stray hairs, was almost spotless, barely any dirt at all. When an officer wearing gloves spread the collar to look closer, he noticed the inner lining felt slightly stiff, as if it had been exposed to water or chemicals. No tears, no major scratches, no signs it had been yanked hard. The initial conclusion was obvious. This jacket had been washed or cleaned before someone left it here. But the most unsettling part was this: there was no logical reason for Emily, if she still had any control, to abandon this jacket behind an old warehouse far from her normal route. None of her friends knew she had ever come to this area. No footprints led into the building, no signs anyone had hidden inside, no evidence of a struggle. The place was too quiet, too empty, too staged. A crime scene technician immediately examined the surface under bright white light. No blood, no loose threads, no oil stains, but clear signs of water. The stitching under the arms and along the collar had faded ever so slightly, enough to show the jacket had gotten wet after she disappeared. There was no natural reason for it to get soaked and then dry out here in the scrubland. Everyone immediately thought the same thing: someone had deliberately washed or wiped the jacket to erase biological evidence. At the scene, Lieutenant Hale stood silent for several seconds before saying, "If someone washed it, that means they had time. And if they had time, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. This was calculated." Everyone present understood the implication. Whoever brought the jacket here wasn't panicking or fleeing in a rush. He was calm enough to clean up after himself. The team immediately bagged the jacket in isolation, avoiding any contact that could contaminate evidence. Every seam, every fiber was photographed and documented. The jacket was folded by protocol and taken to the Killeen PD evidence locker for testing. Even though 1983 lacked modern DNA technology, police still habitually preserved fabric evidence, knowing future advancements might one day unlock doors they couldn't open now. As the investigators left the old warehouse, night was falling. The mood in the group grew heavier with the same unspoken thought: this disappearance was no longer simple. A bicycle placed too neatly, a washed clean jacket, a lone shoe print, interrupted tire tracks. Everything pointed to one thing: someone was controlling the narrative, leading them down a path that wasn't the real one. And with the second piece of physical evidence recovered, the investigation officially entered the murky territory where logic and deception blurred together, a place where even the smallest detail could be a deliberate trap. The unnaturally clean denim jacket pushed Lieutenant Hale to accelerate suspect screening. The mounting evidence showed someone had tampered with the scene, someone who not only had time but displayed eerie calm. That strongly suggested the perpetrator was either familiar with the area, familiar with Emily, or worse, familiar with both. The next day, the team launched a wide round of interviews, focusing on everyone within a 1-mile radius of where Emily was last seen, and everyone already on the primary person of interest list. In total, 12 people were brought in. First was mechanic Ray Donnell, 28, who lived south of Rancier. He often used the back road because he moonlighted at a private garage nearby. Ray said he worked a long shift that day, from noon until evening, with 3 coworkers confirming. His hands were covered in grease, his clothes smelled of metal, everything about him looked like a guy who had just finished a hard day. Though a little gruff, nothing suggested he had ever interacted with Emily. He didn't own a brown pickup. After 30 minutes, police temporarily cleared him. Next came several of Emily's male classmates. Among them, 15-year-old Josh Miller seemed overly nervous. Josh had liked Emily, had asked her a few times to get soda at the shop near school, and been gently turned down. He shook while answering questions, eyes fixed on his sleeves like he was hiding something. But his alibi checked out. He had been at his grandmother's house more than 2 miles from the scene all afternoon, confirmed by her and 3 neighbors. No way he could have been in the scrubland when Emily vanished. His anxiety was chalked up to shock, not guilt. Another who stood out was Dale Simons, a 36-year-old seasonal laborer who had worked at the old warehouse where the jacket was found. Dale lived a drifter lifestyle, took odd jobs unloading freight, and had once been complained about for bothering women at the local supermarket. When questioned, Dale talked a lot, sometimes off-topic, laughed at odd moments. The strange behavior caught the investigators' attention, but nothing tied him directly to the scene. No prints, no witnesses, no vehicle matching the description. Just police instinct kept his name on a watch list. A neighborhood woman reported seeing a long-haired man standing by the fence near the back road that hot afternoon. The description was vague, no clear face, no clothing details. Police couldn't locate anyone matching it. The statement was filed as unverifiable, but the person who drew the most attention was Mark Ellison, 32, who worked at a lumber yard on the outskirts. Mark wasn't on the original POI list. He simply lived near the back road. When questioned, he answered calmly, said he was repairing his house that day, and could prove it with receipts for materials. Yet one detail made the investigator pause his pen. Mark had left Killeen just weeks after Emily disappeared, moving permanently to Austin. He claimed it was for a better job, but the timing was too perfect, and Hale underlined his name in red. The sudden departure without telling neighbors, plus reports of an old truck no one remembered the color he had been seen driving weeks earlier, raised suspicion. Vehicle records showed Mark had once owned a pickup, but the file describing the color was missing, an uncomfortable coincidence. Still, nothing tied him directly to Emily, or any evidence, so Mark stayed on the possible suspect list, but couldn't be elevated higher. There were also completely harmless people, a young mother pushing a stroller through the area, an old man collecting cans, a homeless street vendor. None were present in the critical time window, or had the ability to access where the bicycle was found. When the last interview ended, Hale stood before the whiteboard with 12 names, each with a story, an alibi, but none with the one thing that mattered most, a direct link to Emily. No one was seen with her. No evidence showed anyone handled her belongings. No one had signs of a struggle. When the team reconvened, one officer said, "We have a list but no connection." Hale looked at the photo of the denim jacket pinned to the board, then at the map showing where the bicycle had been placed, and finally at the photograph of the lone shoe print. Everything they had were pieces that refused to fit together. But the Emily Carter case wasn't a simple disappearance. The cleaned evidence, the neatly placed bicycle, the limited traces, led him to the first conclusion in that day's internal report. No suspect has direct evidence. That means the real perpetrator is outside the circle we're looking at. And that was when the case began expanding in a direction none of them expected, beyond the original 12 names, toward the faint outline of someone no one had yet named in those early days of the investigation. While re-examining every note from the initial interviews, Lieutenant Hale ordered the administrative team to bring all original documents from the night Emily vanished into the meeting room for comparison. This is standard in complex cases. When the suspect list yields nothing, police must return to the starting point to see if anything was missed. File boxes were pulled down, decades-old stacks of paper spread across the cold metal table. Younger officers opened folders, while veterans tried to recall that night, each searching their memory for anything that might have been overlooked. But when they reached Harold Briggs's witness statement, the first person to report seeing the brown pickup, the entire group froze. In the sealed file index there was an entry labeled, "Statement Truck Citing Briggs," pages 3 through 6. Yet when they opened it, the file contained only 3 pages, page 4 was completely gone. Not misfiled in another folder, not fallen under the table, not stuck inside the cover. That page was nowhere in the room or the archives. Hale ordered a search of every A3 and A4 shelf, and all 1983 documents. The records clerk, who had worked there nearly 15 years, turned over every stack, saying in disbelief, "I've never seen a sealed log missing a page. There's no sign anyone opened these outside the investigation team." But the fact remained, the page was missing, a gap between page 3 and page 5, that couldn't be explained by ordinary oversight. Page 4 should have contained the detailed description of the viewing angle, distance, exact position of the truck, and possibly the direction it turned or its speed. Another officer, who had helped take the recorded statement that night, suddenly remembered something. Briggs hadn't just described the truck, he also said he thought he saw the shape of a person in the driver's seat. But that description wasn't on page 3 or 5, it would have been on page 4. So the missing page likely contained the description of the driver, the only detail directly linking to an actual human being, the detail that could have built a suspect profile. Hale circled truck sighting in his notebook, pressing the pen so hard it dented the paper, then said, "This is not coincidence. It never is." In the internal report he wrote one short line that would open one of the biggest twists in the case. Brown truck statement, key page missing, cannot be treated as clerical error. Possible evidence of interference with the investigation. What he didn't say out loud, because no one wanted to believe it, was a far darker possibility. Whoever took that page might have known exactly whose life it would affect. An invisible hand had touched the case from the very beginning. And that was only the first in a chain of anomalies that would stretch across 4 decades. The Emily Carter file entered the 1990s like an old wound that never closed, sitting quietly in the Killeen PD archives, yet always present in the minds of the officers who had been part of those first frantic search days. Though the missing page about the brown pickup was never explained, the case was eventually classified, suspended due to lack of evidence. But suspended didn't mean forgotten. Every year when Killeen PD reviewed cold cases, Emily's file was always given priority, even if nothing new ever surfaced. By the early 1990s, as investigative technology shifted from analog to digital, some old cases were reopened to apply new forensic methods. Emily Carter's was pulled again, partly due to pressure from the victim's family, partly because younger detectives assigned to the unit wanted to test themselves on a tough one. Expectations, however, quickly ran into the limits of the era's technology. DNA was starting to be talked about in forensics, but only in primitive form. Extraction methods were crude, requiring large amounts of high-quality biological material. Emily's denim jacket, washed unnaturally clean, left outside, exposed to dust and weather for days, could not yield a usable DNA sample. Even fingerprints were unrecoverable. Dust, moisture, and the fabric surface had wiped everything away. Still, the team tried a method that was new at the time: fiber analysis. Technicians cut tiny sections from the collar and cuffs to check for foreign fibers that might have transferred from close contact with another person's clothing. The result was completely blank. No foreign fibers, no hairs, no clear cells, no organic residue, an irrational level of cleanliness for a jacket worn outdoors. The final report read, "No evidence of external contact found." High probability evidence was cleaned. That only reinforced the belief that the jacket hadn't been abandoned accidentally, but was part of a cover-up. Knowing this, however, didn't help them move forward, it just left them more stuck. During this period, Killeen changed a lot. Population grew, Fort Hood expanded, new cases forced the department to spread manpower thin. The veteran officers who had searched in 1983 began retiring or transferring, taking memories with them that paper files could never capture. Their departure made Emily's case fade even more among dozens of new investigations each year. Every time the file was reopened, the next generation of detectives faced the same puzzle with too few pieces, no direct witness of Emily meeting anyone. No description of the brown pickup driver, because of the missing page. No traces from the bicycle beyond it being staged. No usable DNA. No evidence linking to any specific suspect. Suspect Mark Ellison, the man who left town weeks after the disappearance, was tracked down again, but still no direct tie. Everyone else on the original list of 12 had either alibis, no evidence, moved away, lost contact, or were cleared. The 1994 report stated, "No progress. Case remains classified cold case." In 1996, a tip came into the hotline. A long-haul trucker said he had seen a girl resembling Emily at a rest stop near Dallas in 1985, but there was no stored security footage. The shift workers from that day remembered nothing. The trucker only thought she looked similar. The tip was labeled unverifiable. In the late 1990s, as forensic technology began advancing further, a young investigator suggested using electrostatic dust print lifting on the old crime scene photos to try recovering the shoe print. But the 1983 photo quality was too poor, and the only shoe print had long been washed away by rain and wind, and so the case was opened, closed, reopened, then closed again. Each reopening that yielded nothing only thickened the file's emotional layers: exhaustion, disappointment, doubt, and the greatest fear began appearing in the 2000 review minutes. If the missing witness page was not due to clerical error, then the case was interfered with from the very start. But no one had proof, no one knew who had touched the file, no one knew why, and most importantly, if someone was determined enough to remove a single witness page, that person might very much want Emily never to be found. The Emily Carter cold case entered the 2000s, like a shadow straddling two generations of investigators, a case blurred by time, limited by technology, and touched by an invisible hand from the earliest days, burying nearly all hope of resolution under decades of dust. In 2019, more than 3 decades after Emily Carter vanished, a case that had nearly been buried in the dust of time, suddenly received a new spark from a source no one could have predicted. Killeen PD was in the process of digitizing old files for electronic storage, a project that required contacting retired officers to turn over any personal documents related to past cases. On the contact list was Officer Frank Holloway, who had been directly involved in the first days of the Emily Carter investigation in 1983. Frank had left the force in 1998 and now lived quietly in Temple, Texas. He had always been known as meticulous, keeping copies of important notes in his own personal files, a habit once considered excessive by Killeen PD, but in 2019, that very habit became the key that unlocked a door no one had touched in 36 years. When 2 young officers arrived at his house to collect old paperwork, Frank came out carrying a yellowed cardboard box. This box was not on any official inventory. He set it on the kitchen table and sighed, "Maybe it's finally time." Inside were private notes, faded faxes, rough photocopies of case documents he had feared someone might accidentally lose. When they reached the folder, Frank had labeled Car 8310 Notes. One officer immediately noticed something clipped in the middle, a single sheet of paper folded in half, so old the crease was almost crumbling. The page was unfolded, and for several seconds the room seemed to stop breathing. It was a copy of the missing witness page, the 4th page of Harold Briggs's statement, the man who reported seeing the slow-moving brown pickup on the back road, and most importantly, its contents did not match what everyone had assumed for 36 years. On that page, Briggs didn't just describe the brown pickup, he wrote that he saw the driver's arm, and the first thing that caught his eye wasn't the truck's color, but a faint tattoo on the left wrist. In shaky but clear blue ballpoint ink he had written, "I remember it clearly, because the tattoo looked like a dark smudge, maybe a letter or some kind of shape. It was on the left wrist, visible when the person rested their hand on the door." What left Lieutenant Hale speechless when he read the copy wasn't just the tattoo detail, but the far more horrifying truth. This detail had never been released at any time, not to the press, not in press releases, not in case summaries. No one outside the people present that night had ever read it. Meaning, only police and Briggs ever knew about the tattoo. No member of the public could fabricate this detail for a false tip. Only someone who actually saw it, or actually had that tattoo, could ever mention it. Frank Holloway explained that when Briggs's file was collected for official sealing, he had not trusted the way records were handled at the time, so he secretly made a copy. When asked why he never turned the copy over once the original page vanished, Frank gave an answer that silenced everyone, because when I asked about that missing page, someone told me not to dig any deeper. Who, why, in what context? Frank wouldn't, or couldn't, say more. The young officer handling digitization immediately photocopied the page and sent it to the cold case unit. Lieutenant Hale, now elderly, but still a cold case advisor, read the paper 3 times. Each time he circled tattoo left wrist harder. The most terrifying part was the consistency. Briggs had mentioned a figure in the truck from the beginning, but the page describing the tattoo in detail was the exact page that disappeared. One single page. The page that could have led police to identify the driver. Gone for 36 years. No one knew why. No one knew who took it, but now it had resurfaced. From the only person cautious enough to copy everything, Frank. And what stunned the entire team was the quiet admission he whispered while holding the old sheet. I kept this copy because I thought it might matter someday. I never imagined it would matter this much. Immediately, the Emily Carter file was officially reactivated for the 4th time in its history. This time not because of public pressure or routine cold case review, but because of a detail only Briggs and a handful of 1983 officers had ever known. The driver of the brown pickup had a tattoo on his left wrist, and because it had never been made public, it became an unfakeable clue. The clue that sent investigators straight down the path they had missed 36 years earlier. When the long-lost witness page suddenly reappeared from retired officer Frank Holloway's private files after more than 3 decades, Lieutenant Hale knew they finally had the first tangible lead to seriously reopen the Emily Carter case. But he also understood that after all those years, a faded line about a tattoo on the left wrist, no matter how crucial, could not solve the case by itself. For the case to reach a real conclusion for the first time, they needed evidence 1983 could never have provided: DNA. And in 36 years, only one item remained capable of carrying that trace. Emily's denim jacket, the mysterious piece found behind the old warehouse, unnaturally clean, as if someone had tried to erase the past from every fiber. Hale stared at the jacket as it was pulled from evidence storage, sealed in plastic since the early 80s, and he felt a chill remembering the helplessness of the day they first saw it. Back then, no one in the department could have imagined technology would one day be powerful enough to pull anything from fabric that had been deliberately washed. But now, in 2019, the impossible of 1983 had become reality. Without hesitation, he signed the order, sending the jacket to the UNT Forensic Center in Denton, Texas, one of the nation's top labs for recovering microscopic biological traces from old, degraded, or intentionally cleaned evidence. A Killeen PD specialized transport vehicle was assigned. The jacket was placed in a new isolation bag inside a shock-proof case, and the entire trip was filmed to eliminate any future chain of custody issues. When it arrived, forensic expert Lisa Hollander, famous for finding traces others missed, was the first to break the seal. She didn't expect much. The jacket had been washed, it had lain in Texas dust for over a day before collection, and above all, it had been stored for nearly 4 decades. The odds of recoverable biological evidence were almost zero, but an expert's job isn't to believe in odds, it's to search for whatever might have survived. Lisa began with blue and UV light. No blood, no protein crystals, no bodily fluids. What made her pause longest were the creases at the cuffs and collar, the areas hardest for washing to penetrate, and the spots most likely touched by someone grabbing or pulling the jacket. There she detected faint reflectivity changes, a sign that heavily degraded cellular material might still exist. These were exactly the places an offender, who had handled the jacket with bare hands before washing it, could have left touch DNA without realizing. Lisa chose the best method for this situation: wet vacuum micro-extraction, a process that uses microscopic suction to pull individual remaining cells from fabric without destroying the sample. The procedure took nearly 6 hours. When the sample went into the DNA sequencer, Everyone knew it could fail completely, but the miracle happened. The next day, the first email from UNT arrived at Killeen PD. One short line: human trace detected. Low-level touch DNA present. Dead silence fell over the investigation room. 36 years, and there was still DNA. It was too little for a full profile, but enough for STR amplification. 2 days later, the STR results came back. The moment Hale opened the PDF, he knew the weight of nearly half his life finally had an answer. On page 2 of the report, in unmistakable bold type, the DNA does not match the victim. The DNA belongs to a male individual, a man, someone who had touched the jacket, someone who was not Emily, someone not related to the Carter family. An entirely independent, and critically important biological trace had survived on the deliberately cleaned and staged jacket. But the offender had failed, and for the first time in 36 years, police had a real lid. However, degraded 1980s touch DNA couldn't produce a full profile for direct CODIS comparison. So UNT moved to the next step: descendant matching, using genealogical databases to trace distant relatives of the DNA owner. The sample was uploaded to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, platforms where millions of Americans had submitted DNA for personal genealogy. 2 weeks later, the results appeared. The DNA belonged to a lineage originating in the American Midwest. The 3 strongest family names on the tree: Turner, McCrae, Landis. But when cross-referenced with 1983 Killeen residency records, only one surname had anyone living within a 1-mile radius of Emily's Rote: Turner. And when Hale reopened the old suspect interview list, one name jumped out, a name once flagged but never pursued for lack of evidence: Royce Turner. Turner had been cleared in 1983 because there were no witnesses, no physical evidence, no direct link, and because the single most important witness page had vanished. Now both puzzle pieces, the left wrist tattoo and touch DNA from a male in the Turner lineage, had reappeared together, as if time was finally answering the questions it had buried so long ago. Hale closed the report, his hand trembling slightly, but his eyes brighter than ever. He wrote one short line in his old notebook, a line he had never had the chance to write in 36 years: "We have DNA." The Emily Carter case officially has a real suspect, and from that moment, the coldest case in Killeen began turning for the first time in nearly half a century. When the UNT forensic DNA report revealed the touch DNA on the denim jacket belonged to a male connected genealogically to the Turner, McCrae, Landis families, Lieutenant Hale knew the investigation had entered the phase where modern technology was finally catching up to the mistakes of the past. Killeen PD immediately partnered with UNT's forensic genealogists for deeper analysis, a complex process that required building a massive family tree from hundreds of distant genetic matches. Starting from the degraded STR amplified profile, the genealogists used software combining GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, and branching algorithms to generate a list of over 300 distant relatives stretching across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas. Many lived hundreds of miles from Killeen with no possible connection to Emily Carter's disappearance, but forensic genealogy isn't simply about the closest DNA match. It's about locating the most recent common ancestors, then working backward through descendant branches, until finding the individual who fits the time, place, and opportunity to encounter the victim. To do that, the experts had to identify the most recent common ancestors, a couple living in the central United States around 1850. From that pair, the tree split into 7 major lines, and the team eliminated branches one by one based on geography. No Kansas or Missouri branches had descendants who moved to Bell County between 1970 and 1990. Some McCrae descendants were scattered across Louisiana, but none had ever relocated to the Killeen area. The Landis branch had a few people in Dallas and Fort Worth, but none matched the age or location in the year Emily vanished. Only one branch had a migration pattern that fit the Turner branch, where many members had lived in West Texas, especially San Angelo, a city about 3 hours from Killeen. When UNT traced the Turner branch backward from living relatives to ancestors, they found 4 direct descendants born between 1950 and 1970. old enough to be potential suspects in 1983. All four had residence information in tax, employment, or vehicle records. 3 had lived in San Angelo or nearby throughout the 1980s and never came to Killeen. Only 1 had ever lived in Killeen during the exact year Emily disappeared. Royce Emmett Turner, born 1951, electrician, employed by a civilian maintenance company, registered temporary residence near Rancière Avenue, from February to November 1983. When that name appeared on the screen, the entire Killeen PD investigation room went silent, not because they had never heard it before, but because they had 36 years earlier. Royce Turner had been briefly questioned in 1983, simply for living minutes from Emily's walking route, but at the time there were no witnesses, no evidence, nothing to charge him with. And most crucially, the missing page describing the left wrist tattoo was the very page that should have made them focus on Royce from the start, because Royce had long been known for a crude homemade tattoo done with needle and cheap ink as a teenager, a blurry mark always on his left wrist. That page disappearing from the 1983 file had sent the investigation chasing innocent people for decades. Its reappearance in 2019, at the exact moment DNA pointed to the Turner lineage, felt like fate twisting the clock backward and forcing justice to give back what had been stolen. The forensic genealogists double-checked the 300-plus relatives to rule out error. They looked for matches in age 32 in 1983, the age range where an offender could quickly overpower a victim, ability to drive an older pickup, and especially history of travel through the Rancière Avenue area. Out of the entire list, only Royce Turner met every criterion. When the family tree was complete, UNT sent Killeen PD a nearly 40-page report detailing how they had narrowed hundreds of people down to one single suspect. In that report, a passage was underlined in red and sent directly to Lieutenant Hale. The highest probability match between the touch DNA and the genealogical cluster is Royce E. Turner B. 1951. And the next line, even more important, residence confirmed, Killeen, Texas, February to November 1983. It was a sentence Hale read 3 times, because it carried the weight of 36 missed years of investigation. Royce Turner, the man they had asked a few casual questions decades ago, was no longer a shadow. He was the center of the picture. But forensic genealogy didn't stop there. The UNT team dug deeper into Royce's residence history and uncovered a chilling detail. Turner had worked temporary jobs at an old warehouse behind Rancière, the exact area where Emily's denim jacket was found. That warehouse in 1983 was owned by the company where Turner was employed as an electrician, maintaining lighting and roll-up doors. This turned possible opportunity into direct connection. Emily's jacket was found directly behind the warehouse where Turner worked the year she vanished. This could not be coincidence. Forensic genealogy further clarified that Turner wasn't just a distant relative in the DNA cluster. He was the only person in the entire Turner family living within range to encounter the victim, who owned an older pickup per 1982 vehicle registration, and most critically, who had a blurry left wrist tattoo matching witness Harold Briggs's description from the missing page. When Hale reviewed the 1983 suspect list again, he remembered Turner had left Killeen just weeks after Emily's disappearance, claiming he was looking for work in San Angelo. That sudden departure had not seemed significant at the time. Now it looked exactly like an offender fleeing. When everything was combined, DNA genealogical cluster residence address warehouse brown pickup left wrist tattoo, it all converged on one single point, Royce Turner. And in the official report sent back to the Killeen investigation team, UNT concluded with a final line that haunted everyone. Royce E. Turner is not only the strongest candidate, he is the only candidate. With that conclusion, Lieutenant Hale finally saw what he had never seen in nearly 40 years, a straight line from the crime scene to a flesh and blood human being. And for the first time since 1983, the name Royce Turner was no longer just a vague suspect. He was the focal point, the answer, the shadow that had stood in the middle of the case from day one. All that remained was the final step. Hale knew he had to confirm the last piece of evidence, and head straight to San Angelo, where Royce Turner had lived peacefully for decades, as if the past could never find him again. But the past had found him, and this time it carried DNA genealogy, and a truth there was no escaping. When forensic genealogy pinpointed Royce Turner as the only suspect capable of contacting Emily's jacket, the Killeen PD team moved to the next phase, timeline cross-verification, because in missing person cases, time and location never lie. Lieutenant Hale ordered a full retrieval of Turner's 1983 employment records in Killeen, a difficult task since the maintenance company he worked for had changed ownership multiple times, and paper records from that era were poorly preserved. Still, rare luck struck when Hale located an old storage box shoved into a side warehouse of the county administrative building. Inside were 1983 civilian maintenance crew timesheets. Turner had signed out in pencil on the afternoon shift sheets, and according to the log he clocked out on September 14, 1983, at 3:05 p.m., a critically important time, because that was the exact window when Emily left school, between 3:10 and 3:15. The distance from Turner's job site to the Rancier area was only a 7 miles to 10-minute drive, easily enough for him to be on the back road the moment Emily turned onto it. With the new data, the team rebuilt the timeline on the board. Emily walked out of school while the sun was still blazing. Turner drove away from work almost simultaneously, and the brown pickup Briggs saw crawling along the back road was very likely Turner's truck passing through the area the instant Emily appeared. To solidify the timeline, Hale ordered a check of a lead often ignored in old cases, Fort Hood military surveillance footage. In 1983, Fort Hood used monochrome cameras recording to magnetic tape reels to monitor gates, not civilian security. No one had thought to review them in 3 decades, but the military's archiving system had one advantage: they almost never threw away historical records. After nearly 2 weeks of coordination, Fort Hood Legal released the tapes from the day Emily vanished, including one camera angled, not directly, but sufficiently toward the Rancier back road, capturing moving shadows against the afternoon sunlight. When the old footage was played, the quality was almost opaque, but the Bell County forensic video analyst enhanced contrast and confirmed that between approximately 3:20 and 3:25 p.m., a short bed square body single cab pickup moved unusually slowly along the back road. Though the camera couldn't show color, the silhouette and wheelbase closely matched the model Turner had registered in 1982, an older Ford F-100, recorded as faded brown with a sun-bleached roof. The camera angle also showed the driver was average build and appeared to be wearing a light-colored shirt. Royce Turner, per personnel files, was average build and typically wore the light-colored uniform of the maintenance crew. The investigators pinned stills from the blurry footage to the board next to Briggs's 1983 description, brownish silver, moving slow like it was watching something. Comparing the two, the entire room knew they had just found a major piece. Briggs had been right, and a military camera had unintentionally captured that truck, the truck no one had properly pursued for years, because the witness page describing the tattoo had vanished from the file. To complete the timeline, the team pulled one more dataset: fuel records. Turner's employer retained gas receipts for company pickups, and on September 14, Turner had filled up just before noon, meaning he could drive all afternoon without stopping at a station. That small detail reinforced that Turner had plenty of time to leave work, drive to Rancier, encounter Emily, and approach her without needing to stop anywhere. Hale drew red lines connecting the time points. 3:05 p.m., Turner clocks out. Approximately 3:15 p.m., Emily leaves school and turns onto the back road. Approximately 3:20 p.m., Fort Hood camera records silhouette of a pickup matching Turner's moving slowly. Approximately 3:25 p.m., Briggs sees a brown pickup that didn't belong to anyone around here. Later, Emily's bicycle is found, tires deflated but not torn. The timeline aligned almost perfectly, not coincidence, not guesswork. Each marker reinforced the next, as if the story from that day had been lying just beneath the surface, waiting for someone persistent enough to piece it together. The youngest investigator on the team, who usually stayed quiet in meetings, spoke softly. If this timeline is correct, Turner made contact with Emily within 10 minutes of her leaving school. That sentence made everyone pause for a second. 10 minutes. Too short for Emily to realize the danger, too fast for anyone else on the road to notice, and perfectly suited for someone who knew the terrain intimately. Hale slowly leaned against the table, staring at the timeline board now covered in notes, photos, arrows, 3 decades of searching, hundreds of hours of review, dozens of cleared suspects, and finally every path led back to the one name they had lacked evidence to hold in 1983. Royce Turner. From DNA to genealogy, from the tattoo to the warehouse location, from the military camera silhouette to the witness statement, every piece converged into an undeniable truth. With this timeline, combined with travel time calculations and Turner's location, the Emily Carter case was no longer a scattered mystery. It had structure, sequence, a flow, and most importantly, a person in the right place at the right time, with every opportunity to do what he had hidden for nearly 40 years. And as Hale closed the file folder, he knew what had to come next. Turn the timeline into action, and the first action was to go to where Turner now lived in San Angelo. The past isn't dead, it never was, and for Royce Turner, that past was about to knock. Once the timeline aligned almost perfectly with Royce Turner's presence in the area Emily turned into, Lieutenant Hale decided to revisit the step they had been unable to complete thoroughly in 1983, re-interviewing the old witnesses, people who back then had given vague statements or accounts deemed too insignificant to pursue. After nearly 40 years, memories fade, but sometimes the details dismissed as unimportant become the pieces that define the entire case. Hale and 2 younger investigators returned to Killeen, tracking down everyone who had lived near the Rancier area that year, and something strange quickly emerged. Though time had blurred much, the name Turner still made several people shudder, as if they had always suspected him, but never fully said it. The first person they met was Louise Carter, no relation to Emily, who had lived right beside the back road. She had long since moved away from Killeen, but when police mentioned Royce Turner, she immediately said something that made the 3 investigators exchange glances. He was always staring at the teenage girls, the kind that gave me chills. She said Turner often stood on the porch of the boarding house he rented, leaning against the doorframe smoking, eyes always following the girls walking past. No one back then considered it criminal, just creepy. But the way she described it painted a clear picture of a predator watching prey in the scorching Texas shade. Another witness, Devin Marks, a former plumber in the Rancier area, said he always kept his distance from Turner because the man asked weird questions about the kids. Devin recalled one time Turner directly asked, "How old is that girl? Does she usually walk this way?" referring to another teenage girl in the neighborhood. Devin had thought it odd at the time. Now the context was entirely different. When Hale asked if he remembered Turner having a tattoo, Devin nodded instantly. Yeah, left wrist, like a dark smudge. That casual confirmation after 36 years matched perfectly with Briggs's secret witness page. But the strongest lead came when they located Jace Whitman, now in his 60s, who had worked at the small convenience store near the vacant lot where Emily was last seen. Jace had been questioned briefly back then, but because his statement was too vague, police never followed up. This time, when Hale mentioned Royce Turner, Jace froze, eyes distant, as if remembering something far from minor. "I did see him arguing with someone," Jace blurted, "but I thought it was with an adult." Hale sat up straight. "Are you sure?" Jace nodded, voice dropping. "I think so, but now that you mention the missing girl, I remember it again." The voice was smaller, higher. He exhaled sharply. "It might have been a young girl." Jace recounted that day, as he was closing the store, he heard voices arguing behind the warehouse, the exact spot where the denim jacket was later found. He couldn't see faces clearly, because the sun was setting, light flashing off old metal sheets, but he remembered the silhouette of an average-height man with messy hair, gesturing angrily. Beside him was the sound of sobbing or hurried speech from someone smaller. He didn't investigate because he assumed it was a family dispute, but now, with everything pointing to Turner, he realized his mistake. I should have walked around to check. I should have seen who the other person was. Another witness, Turner's former neighbor Joe Ellen, said Turner once brought home, soaking wet clothes as if they had been hastily washed and hung them behind the boarding house. When she asked, Turner claimed he had spilled ink and had to wash them. She hadn't thought much of it because she was busy with 2 young children, but now, recalling the blurry tattoo, the rushed laundry, and Turner leaving town just weeks after the disappearance, she sighed. Maybe I always felt something was off. But we all thought the police knew what they were doing. It wasn't just direct statements that made Turner the focal point. A former co-worker, Gary Holt, said Turner often vanished from the job site for hours without explanation. He'd always say he was fixing wiring somewhere, but sometimes the repair logs didn't have his name, Gary said. I remember one time he came back with red dust all over his boots, the scrubland kind. The only place in Killeen with that exact red dirt was where Emily's bicycle was found. The investigators compiled every account and pinned them to the board. Turner watched teenage girls in the neighborhood. Turner asked about girls' ages and walking habits. Turner had a blurry tattoo on his left wrist. Turner was heard arguing with a young girl near the old warehouse. Turner once brought home clothes soaked as if hastily washed. Turner frequently disappeared into areas with red scrubland dirt. Every statement, every decades-old memory, pointed to the same person. No more scattered leads like the original list of 12 suspects. No more vague intuition. No more diagnosis without data. Now every piece of the puzzle, DNA, genealogy, timeline, Fort Hood camera, tattoo, warehouse location, and living witnesses, spiraled toward one name only: Royce Emmett Turner. When the last interview ended, Hale sat in the car in silence for a long time. The hot, dry Texas wind blew across the dusty fields, carrying the same feeling as that afternoon in 1983. The sense that something had been missed, hidden, torn away from the truth. But this time, Hale no longer felt stuck. For the first time he saw it more clearly than ever. They had the right man. They just had to prove it. And Royce Turner, living hundreds of miles away in San Angelo, would not be able to outrun the statements that had just been awakened after nearly 40 years of silence. When every piece from timeline, witness statements, genealogy, and DNA converged on the name Royce Emmett Turner, Lieutenant Hale and 2 younger investigators immediately drove to San Angelo to conduct the first formal interview. Turner was now in his late 60s, thinning gray hair, face etched with the lines of age and manual labor. He lived in a weathered mobile home, set apart on the edge of town, surrounded by barren land and inoperable junk vehicles. When police knocked, Turner appeared unnaturally calm, as if he had long been accustomed to people bringing up the past. And when Hale said they wanted to talk about the afternoon of September 14, 1983, Turner showed no surprise. He only raised an eyebrow and gave a faint smirk, like a man who had rehearsed his answers for years. In the temporary interview room at the San Angelo PD, Turner leaned back in the plastic chair, arms crossed over his chest, voice raspy from cigarettes, as he answered the first question. Hale asked where he was the afternoon Emily disappeared. Turner replied instantly, without hesitation, I was home, all afternoon, didn't go anywhere. He emphasized each word, as if trying to shut down any further digging. When Hale asked if anyone could confirm that, Turner gave a dry laugh. I lived alone back then, you know that. The answer sounded harmless enough, but with everything they now knew about Turner clocking out at 3:05, the Fort Hood camera capturing a truck like his at 3:20, witnesses hearing an argument behind the warehouse, claiming he was home all afternoon, was plainly a lie. Yet to corner Turner, Hale needed hard evidence, not just intuition, and the youngest investigator, the one who had earlier tied the camera timestamp, suggested checking something few would think of: 1983 electric utility records. Texas power companies kept old records on microfilm before digitization, and retrieving consumption data for a single house on a single day in 1983 sounded absurd. Yet strangely, the San Angelo utility still had the archive, not minute by minute, but enough to show whether power was used in each time block. Just one day after the interview, Hale received the copied data. When he opened it, the entire team went dead silent. Electricity usage at Turner's residence on September 14, 1983, was 0 from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., no swamp cooler, no lights, no background appliances, no refrigerator door openings, no fluctuation indicating anyone was home that afternoon. Meanwhile, Turner had told police he was home all afternoon, watching TV and dozing off, but a 1983 television couldn't run without drawing power. A window AC unit couldn't operate without leaving a trace. Even opening the fridge would cause a tiny spike in the block. But everything registered 0. This was not a technical glitch, not a phantom record, not a microfilm misread. This was a crude, blatant lie. Turner hadn't even considered police might check this kind of data. When Hale returned to the interview room and slid the utility printout across the table, Turner's initial confidence vanished. He stared at the paper, then at Hale. "What the hell is this?" Hale answered softly. "This is the power record for the day the girl vanished. Your house used 0 electricity all afternoon. No TV, no fan, no lights." Turner stayed silent for several seconds, then gave the excuse investigators hear too often. "The meter must have been broken. I was still home." The excuse was so clumsy, the two younger investigators had to fight not to laugh. Hale leaned forward. "Mr. Turner, you say you were home, but the power record shows nobody turned on a single thing for 5 hours. No lights, no TV, no water. What do you think we want to hear?" Turner bit his lip, eyes flicking slightly left, the direction people often look when lying. I don't remember. It was a long time ago." Hale replied. "You don't remember, yet you were absolutely certain you were home." Turner swallowed, narrowed his eyes as if trying to rebuild the story. A long silence. Hale decided to push one step further. "You clocked out at 3:05. Emily Carter left school minutes later. Your truck was captured by a military camera on the back road, the exact route she took. A witness heard you arguing with a young girl near the old warehouse, and you say you were home all afternoon, with no power." Turner clenched his fist so hard, his knuckles went white, then suddenly leaned back in the chair and let out a dry laugh. "So what exactly are you trying to pin on me? Just because I looked like one of the weird guys around the neighborhood? Just because of some blurry shadow on a camera?" Hale didn't answer. He just stared straight into Turner's eyes, as if looking clean through him. Turner had no idea that what Hale held went far beyond a blurry truck silhouette. Male DNA on Emily's jacket, genealogy narrowing it down to one person, him. Truck footage captured on camera, power records proving his statement was a lie. A witness who heard him arguing with a girl. Left wrist tattoo matching the only description from the long missing witness page. The more Turner talked, the more holes he revealed. The home all afternoon story was such a crude, clumsy lie, so easy to dismantle, that Hale knew one thing for certain: Turner was hiding something, and he knew he was being cornered. When the interview ended, Hale stepped outside and stood alone in the harsh Texas sun. He wasn't triumphant, he wasn't relieved, he only felt one reality clearer than ever. Turner knew they had found him, and he was starting to be afraid. But his fear was only beginning. Because this had been only the first interview, and Hale knew the second time, Turner would no longer be able to sit calmly like today. 2 days after the first interview, when Turner's home all afternoon claim had been brutally exposed by the power records, when the consumption data proved no one had been inside his house from 1 p.m. to 6 o'clock p.m., Hale scheduled the second interview. This time there would be no more probing for words, no more testing reactions, no more circling. This was direct confrontation, no mercy. When Turner walked into the interview room, the cocky calm from the first meeting was gone. He glanced around, eyes darting constantly, as if looking for an exit in a room with nothing but 4 white walls and a metal table in the center. The chair creaked under him, as fragile as the last scraps of his composure. Hale sat across from him and placed a manila folder on the table. He didn't open it, didn't speak, just set it down gently. That small sound made Turner flinch, as if the folder contained the thing he feared most. Hale let the folder sit there for several seconds, long enough for Turner to feel its weight in the air. Then he opened it and slid a red-bordered sheet into the middle of the table. The UNT forensic logo sat in the top left corner. The line male touch DNA profile recovered stood out unmistakably. Hale spoke slowly, every word clear. No need to threaten. Mr. Turner, this is DNA recovered from Emily's jacket. Turner froze, lips stretching in a failed attempt to control his expression. He stared at the paper like it was a thin, glinting blade. His hands began to tremble, first the thumbs, then spreading across his palms. Hale didn't miss it. We sent the jacket to UNT, Hale continued. They extracted touch DNA from a male, not Emily. Turner swallowed hard and muttered fast, almost inaudible. I never touched that girl's jacket. I told you, I didn't know her. I never touched anybody. Hale calmly placed another sheet on the table, the genealogy printout. Do you know what forensic genealogy is? Turner didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the bold line, Turner family cluster. Hale leaned forward. This DNA leads straight to your family line. Turner shook his head. No way, my family's huge. I've got relatives everywhere. You've got the wrong guy. Hale turned the pages one by one. No mistake. Out of more than 300 distant relatives, only one ever lived in Killeen in 1983. Only one was on the exact road Emily walked. Only one lived near the warehouse where the jacket was found. Only one had a left wrist tattoo. Only one left town weeks after the girl vanished. He paused, staring straight into Turner's eyes. Only you. Turner twisted away from the gaze, half standing then sitting back down, trying to look calm but resembling a trapped animal. He changed tone. Okay, maybe I touched the jacket once. Maybe I handed it to her when it was raining. Who knows? It was years ago. That was statement number 2, and the first shift. Hale noted it but didn't react. He knew more lies were coming. He continued. You said you were home that day, but the power bill shows nobody was in the house all afternoon. We verified it. You weren't there. Turner slammed a hand on the table. Then I went for a drive. I was out driving. There's nothing wrong with driving. Hale nodded, as if he'd been waiting for exactly that. Right, you were driving. And a Fort Hood camera captured the silhouette of a pickup identical to yours at 3:20 p.m. The exact moment Emily turned onto the back road. Turner stiffened. That was statement number 3, and the clearest breakdown yet. He was starting to panic. You can't charge me with a blurry shadow. That's just coincidence. Hale didn't let him hide behind the word coincidence. Coincidence. He gave a faint smile. Let me see. Your DNA on the jacket. Your tattoo described by a witness. Your truck at the scene. You missing from home all afternoon. You asking around the neighborhood about teenage girls' ages. A witness hearing you argue with a young girl's behind the warehouse. He tilted his head, watching Turner tie himself in knots with every word. How many coincidences does it take before it becomes the truth? Turner was breathing hard, hands clawing at the metal table, like he was searching for something to hold on to. He looked at Hale, no longer angry, but terrified, the terror of being stripped bare after 40 years. And that was when Hale delivered the final blow. He placed the long-missing 1983 witness page on the table, the copy from Frank Holloway's file, the tattoo, left wrist, the driver leaning down toward Emily. Those lines made Turner go instantly pale. No way. Who gave you that? We don't need to know what you're afraid of, Hale said, voice low and steady. We just need you to know one thing. Every piece of evidence from 1983 to 2019 is pointing straight at you, and you have no more stories left to change. Turner clenched his fists, dropped his head, breathing short and shallow like a man being strangled by his own words. He whispered, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. But it was no longer a denial, it was a plea. The plea of someone who knew the net had closed. The interview ended when Turner could no longer speak, not because he was innocent, but because he knew timeline plus DNA plus genealogical match plus witnesses, plus power records, plus military camera, equal sign no way out, and Lieutenant Hale walked out of the interview room with a feeling he had waited nearly 40 years for this time. Turner could not run. After the second interview, when Turner wavered, changed his story repeatedly, and finally collapsed into visible fear under the weight of the DNA and timeline evidence, Lieutenant Hale knew the moment for action had arrived. No more reason to wait, no more gaps to redirect the investigation. The file was complete enough for an arrest warrant, genealogical DNA match, power records proving perjury, Fort Hood camera, capturing a matching truck silhouette, witnesses confirming they heard him arguing with a young girl near the scene, and the left wrist tattoo detail, all converging on one name and one name only, Royce Emmett Turner. Early the next morning, a Bell County task force with San Angelo PD rolled up to Turner's weathered mobile home. The Texas sun was just rising, golden light slicing across the dry lot, glinting off old oil puddles beneath the rusted pickup, sitting in Turner's yard. When the first patrol car stopped, Turner stepped out the door, squinting into the light, his face no longer calm but carrying something close to despair. As if he had always known this day would come, he just hadn't known it would be today. Hale walked forward, holding the arrest warrant signed by the judge the night before. He read it slowly, every word precise. Turner offered no resistance, he only swallowed hard, hands shaking as the cuffs clicked behind his back. Not a word, not a question, just head down, shoulders sagging like a man watching his own shadow shatter on the ground. As Turner was placed in the transport vehicle, Hale stood watching. He recognized this kind of silence. It wasn't cooperation, it wasn't submission, it was the silence of someone whose past had finally caught up. The search warrant was executed the moment Turner left. The mobile home looked run down and cluttered from the outside, but when the team stepped inside they almost froze. Not because of filth or chaos, but because one area of the house was arranged with unnatural neatness, in complete contrast to the rest. That area was a small back room with a low wooden table, and on it were items Hale believed could not possibly be there by accident. The first thing they found was a 1983 map of Killeen, yellowed with age, edges curled from being opened too many times. And right in the center of the map was a red pencil circle, not large, but sharp and chillingly precise, drawn exactly around the spot where Emily's bicycle had been found. Not an inch off, not a single point wrong. Hale stared at that circle, feeling time tighten around his throat. For nearly 40 years they had believed the person who staged Emily's bike had planned it carefully, but no one imagined the perpetrator kept a map marking that exact location in his own home. Like a sick trophy. It didn't stop there. They found a plastic box containing old odds and ends, random metal scraps, a small denim jacket button that had fallen off a women's size, a faded ID card with the name no longer legible, and a mint green 1980s style hair clip. Nothing in the box was directly tied to Emily, but everything fit the category of items picked up around the Rancier area back then. No normal person keeps things like that. No one accidentally keeps a map with the exact bicycle location circled. No one coincidentally keeps a small denim button, while witnesses remembered Emily wearing a denim jacket the day she vanished. A young investigator picked up a small hardbound notebook. Inside, Turner had logged work schedules from the 1980s, but more disturbing were undated pages with lines like, "Leave no trace. No one knows I was there. No one saw, no one remembers. Have to stay quiet." Hale read each line, hand trembling slightly. He never wrote Emily's name, never wrote a date, but the content was enough to show this was not the notebook of an ordinary electrician. In the corner of the room, the search team found an old wooden box with a rusted lock. When they pried it open, it contained only one item, a faded white handkerchief, with blue trim, the kind teenage girls carried in the 1980s. No one could confirm it was Emily's. But Hale knew Turner didn't keep these things by chance. He kept them because they were a predator's souvenirs. Then the team found the final item, the one that confirmed he had been obsessed with the disappearance site, A small metal ruler with Rancier S. 1983, scrawled in ballpoint on the back. He had marked the location. He had marked the year. There was no doubt left. Turner hadn't just been near the place Emily vanished. He lived inside the memory of it. When the search team left the house, Hale stood looking back at the little mobile home trembling under the Texas sun, where a man had lived quietly for decades, believing the past was buried, that a washed clean denim jacket and one vanished witness page were enough to erase every trace. But technology had outrun his cover-up. Witnesses had outrun their fear, and Turner, who thought he was safe, had left behind far too much that could not be explained. As Turner was driven away in the transport van back to Killeen, the last look he threw toward Hale wasn't hatred, it was panic. Because for the first time in nearly 4 decades, Royce Emmett Turner could no longer hide. The trial of Royce Emmett Turner took place at the Bell County Courthouse, in an atmosphere heavier than anyone had ever witnessed. From the moment Turner was arrested in San Angelo, the Killeen community seemed to relive the memories of 4 decades earlier. Old newspaper clippings, photos of Emily with her bicycle, the Carter family prayer vigils, everything came flooding back with an indescribable weight. And when Turner walked into the courtroom with shining handcuffs under the lights, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. But here, emotions did not decide fate, evidence did. Turner sat beside his defense attorney, trying to maintain calm, but his shoulders were hunched, his eyes evaded contact, as if the darkness of 1983 was crawling up and clinging to him right there in the defendant's chair. Prosecutor Jenna Lockhart, who had cracked numerous cold cases with DNA, stood before the jury for the first time, and began in a steady, clear voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this crime may have occurred nearly 40 years ago, but DNA does not lie, and the past, no matter how carefully hidden, eventually finds its way back." Lockhart laid out the case structure. Male-touched DNA, from the Turner lineage found on the cuff of Emily's denim jacket. Genealogy, narrowing it to exactly one person living in Killeen in 1983, Royce Turner. A timeline proving Turner clocked out the exact moment Emily left school. Fort Hood footage, capturing the silhouette of a short bed pickup, identical to Turner's moving slowly in Emily's direction. Power records showing he blatantly lied about being home all afternoon. A witness who heard him arguing with a young girl near the old warehouse, and finally, physical evidence from his own home. A 1983 Killeen map with a red circle precisely around the spot where Emily's bicycle was recovered. When Lockhart held up the yellowed map, the silence that fell over the courtroom was almost suffocating. "This," she said, "is not coincidence. This is the memory of someone who knew exactly what he did, and exactly where he left that bicycle." Turner dropped his head, fingers gripping the table edge until they went white. When it was the defense's turn, Attorney Marcus Rothwell stood, adjusted his tie, and looked at the jury with a reassuring smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of memory, human memory, and the memory of data more than 40 years old, and we all know that memory, whether from people or records, can be wrong." He hammered 2 points, secondary transfer and misremembering. Regarding the DNA, he argued, touch DNA can transfer through secondary surfaces. A jacket left in a residential area for days could pick up DNA from dozens of people. He tried to plant the image of a jacket improperly secured at the scene, opening the door to doubt that the DNA came from Turner rather than some innocent source. As for the witnesses, Rothwell did not miss his chance. They are recalling events from 40 years ago. Their memories have certainly been influenced by news reports, by community obsession, by the desire to find a perpetrator. He repeated over and over, no confession, no eyewitness, no physical evidence linking Turner to a body, because Emily's body was never found. That was the point he drove home hardest. No body, no crime. But Lockhart was ready. When she called UNT forensic expert Dr. Lisa Hollander, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted completely. Hollander stood before the jury with grave composure and no excess emotion, exactly like the DNA she represented. "Touch DNA does not appear randomly," she said. "It requires direct contact, sufficient pressure, sufficient time, And most importantly, the DNA recovered was embedded deep in the cuff folds, an area highly unlikely to pick up environmental transfer. She clearly explained the difference between secondary transfer and primary contact, illustrated with images of ruptured cells, degradation levels, and the exact locations on the jacket where the DNA was found. If this DNA had come from the environment, Hollander stated, it would be on the surface fabric, not inside the seams. Rothwell tried to counter, the jacket was washed. DNA could have migrated. Hollander calmly shook her head. No washing removes DNA. It does not drive it deeper into folds. That only happens with contact before washing. A simple but devastating answer that cut the legs out from under the entire defense argument. Rothwell pivoted to attacking genealogy. The Turner branch has hundreds of people, why target only my client? Hollander didn't need notes. She answered instantly, because only one person in that branch lived in Killeen in 1983. Only one was within a 1-mile radius of where the victim was last seen. Only one owned a pickup matching the description. Only one had a left wrist tattoo. Each time she said only one, Turner shrank a little more. When the timeline portion arrived, Lockhart presented the side-by-side chart. 3:05 p.m. Turner clocks out. 3:15 p.m. Emily leaves school. 3:20 p.m. Fort Hood camera records silhouette of a pickup matching Turner's. 3:25 p.m. Witness Briggs sees a brown pickup moving slowly in Emily's direction. Defense counsel fired back. No one saw the driver's face, it's just a shadow. Lockhart responded as smoothly as a thin blade. That shadow traveled Turner's exact route, at the exact time, in the exact vehicle type, in the exact direction, and whose DNA was on Emily's cuff? Mr. Turner's. When the evidence seized from Turner's home came up, Rothwell objected fiercely. The map could have been bought anywhere. The circle could have been drawn out of curiosity. Lockhart held up photos of the evidence box, eyes sharp as tempered glass. Then what about the small women's-sized denim button, the 1980s era items, the notes about concealing traces, the box containing a hair clip and handkerchief? And why did Turner keep a 1983 Killeen map for 40 years? No one answered. No answer was needed. Finally, Lockhart stepped directly in front of the jury and delivered the line the entire courtroom felt in its bones. This is not a case of memory. This is a case of DNA, of maps, of power records, of military footage, of independent witness statements. For 40 years, only one person has appeared in every single one of those facts. Royce Emmett Turner. Turner's head dropped so low his chin nearly touched his chest. The jury stared at him. No one looked away. He knew there was nowhere left to hide, no lie left to save him, no darkness left to cover the truth. And when the prosecution placed the DNA report on the table one final time, the courtroom fell dead silent. Turner hunched, shoulders trembling slightly, like a period placed on a sentence written in 1983, only waiting for someone to read it aloud. The trial continued, but everyone understood. Turner was completely trapped. When the jury returned after nearly 7 hours of deliberation, Turner could barely lift his head. He sat motionless in the defendant's chair, eyes fixed on the floor, hands clasped as if trying to hold on to the last warmth of freedom about to vanish. When the verdict was read, guilty, there was no cheer, no sigh of relief, only a silence heavy as lead, as if the entire courtroom was listening to the gears of history finally close a circle left open for 42 years. Turner did not react. No outburst, no protest, no plea. He just sat there, shoulders sagging, as if the sentence merely confirmed what he had known the moment the DNA report was placed on the table in that second interview. The truth had caught him. That afternoon in the Killeen PD press room, Lieutenant Hale, the man who had spent nearly half his remaining career chasing this case, stood before the microphones looking both exhausted and relieved. "We take no joy in convicting a human being," he said, voice low and slow, "but we know that Emily Carter has finally been given her voice back." The internal after-action report detailed the 1983 investigative failures, lack of technology application, over-reliance on witness memory, inadequate scene preservation, and above all, the disappearance of the witness page describing the tattoo. Hale could not hide his bitterness when he said, "One single missing page derailed the investigation for nearly 4 decades. No one knows whether that page disappeared by accident or design, but everyone understands the consequence. A girl vanished, a predator walked free, and an entire town lived with the haunting for generations." Yet it was precisely the persistence of the file, and the miraculous survival of what seemed a useless piece of evidence, that allowed the case to be solved. The denim jacket, washed clean to erase every trace, became the very item that brought Turner back into the light of justice. A few tiny cells lingering in a cuff fold became the clue that let forensic genealogy build a 300-person family tree and narrow it to exactly one name. A red circle on an old map, a blurry truck silhouette on Fort Hood film, a witness statement missing for 36 years, and a Turner family DNA branch, all slammed shut the longest cold case in Killeen history. As Hale left the press conference, the Texas sky had turned to late afternoon. He stood on the steps outside headquarters, watching the dust devils from Fort Hood swirl, exactly like the afternoon in 1983, when Emily disappeared. There was no triumph, no absolute joy, only a quiet sensation, as if the weight he had carried inside for 4 decades had finally been set down. The Emily Carter cold case, after 42 years, was officially closed. Not by luck, not by confession, but by persistence, by science, and by one piece of evidence everyone thought had been completely erased, yet it had kept exactly what was needed: the truth. Looking back at the Emily Carter case, and the name Royce Turner dragged into the light, after 42 years, we Americans living today are not just hearing a crime story, we are looking into a crystal-clear mirror of community responsibility, faith in science, and the cost of silence. Emily was just a 17-year-old girl, riding her bike home on a back road, but a series of 1983 investigative failures, from the disappeared witness page, describing the left wrist tattoo, to the dismissal of the witness, who heard arguing behind the warehouse, allowed a predator like Turner to live free for decades. Meanwhile, the determination of people like Lieutenant Hale, the preservation of that denim jacket in evidence storage, and modern forensic technology from places like UNT and Fort Hood, have shown that science and persistence can correct some of the past's mistakes, but they can never give a victim her life back. The lesson for Americans today is never dismiss the small details: a man who always watches girls near the school, a distant scream, a brown pickup moving unusually slowly, because those can be the line between safety and tragedy. For the system, this case reminds us to seriously invest in cold case units, evidence storage, DNA databases, and forensic genealogy, because some families will wait 20, 30, 40 years just to hear the word justice. And for every individual, Emily's story is a powerful reminder: trust your gut when something feels off, speak up for children, for women, for the vulnerable around you, because your attention or your 911 call today might be exactly what prevents another Emily Carter case tomorrow. If you want to keep following journeys to reclaim justice like the Emily Carter case, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any story. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue to shine light on mysteries everyone thought time had buried forever.